Are you looking for wisdom, courage, and guidance on your journey as a changemaker? Grab your headphones, a warm drink, and possibly a notebook. You're going to want to take notes. You've found your new favorite podcast. Welcome to Become a Good Ancestor, a podcast hosted by Layla Saad. Layla is a New York Times and Sunday Times bestselling author, an international speaker, and a globally respected teacher on the topics of race, identity, leadership, personal transformation, and social change. In each episode, Layla interviews some of the world's most inspiring authors of color who are changing the world with their words. From memoirs to manifestos, poetry to pop culture, science to social justice, and everything in between. Join Layla as she dives deep with BIPOC authors who are showing us the way to healing and liberation. This is a place for people who want to help change the world, in honor of those who have come before us, and in service to those who will come after we are gone.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 6 of Become a Good Ancestor podcast. I am your host, Layla Saad, and this is the place where inner work meets social change. Today, I'm speaking with marketer, activist, philosopher, philanthropist, and 2 times New York Times bestselling author, Frederick Joseph. Frederick is the best-selling author of the books The Black Friend and Patriarchy Blues, which we'll be talking about today. And then his next book is called Better Than We Found It, and that comes out in the fall. Frederick uses his writing and marketing skills to create change, to help people grow, and to foster learning and unlearning to uplift marginalized people. His second book, Patriarchy Blues, Reflections on Manhood, which was published by Harper Perennial, is our August book club selection. In this thought-provoking collection of essays, poems, stories, and short reflections, Frederick explores issues of masculinity and patriarchy from both a personal and a cultural standpoint. From fatherhood and manning up, quote unquote, to abuse and therapy, he fearlessly and thoughtfully tackles the complex realities of men's lives today and their significance for society, lending his insights specifically as a Black man. To find out more about the book and to join us in the book club, visit becomegoodancestor.com/book club. All right, welcome, Frederick.
Thanks for having me. I am excited and just ecstatic to be here.
We are so excited to speak with you today. I've been following you for a while on Instagram. You and like 3 other Black men whose work I really respect, 2 of whom we've already had in the book club and podcast. So Robert Jones Jr., who is our first ever book club pick, and Dante Stewart, who we've had this year as well. I'm waiting to get Joel Leon. I've already told him, once your book comes out, please let me know. I'm waiting. And then yourself. And the 4 of you actually just did a wonderful live that I got to watch the replay of for Upworthy. So it's my deep pleasure to have you here on the podcast.
Yeah, so it's funny. I have a group chat with the 3 of them. They're all my brothers, phenomenal thinkers, phenomenal writers, and more importantly, just phenomenal men who are just working diligently to get better every day. So it's an honor to be in the space that they've been in.
Absolutely. It's our honor to have you, to have all of you. Before we dive in, let's let people know where they can find you and your work online.
Yeah, people can find me at Fred T. Joseph on Instagram and Twitter. I recently started using TikTok, so for the folks who are into that, please follow me there. I'm not good at it though, so just beware.
Fantastic. Okay, so our very first question is, who are some of the ancestors, living or transitioned, familial or societal, who have influenced you on your journey?
There's just so many. First and foremost, I have to bring my grandmother into this space. My grandmother, there's not enough words for me to say about her. She's the person who inspires me daily as a writer, as a human, as a family member. Someone who I watched struggle and have nothing most of her life, sadly, and yet somehow find time to give everything. Right. So she's the first person I think of, and then I think from a writing sense, from thinking of ancestors, there's obviously Toni Morrison and James Baldwin, but right now I think my heart sings kind of the songs of bell hooks,
Mm,
right? My heart sings many songs, but right now bell hooks has rang especially true. I think not just with the work that I tried to do in Patriarchy Blues, but the work I'm trying to do in general, right? And I think bell hooks should be an ancestor on everyone's mind, especially as we are navigating these treacherous waters of patriarchy in its manifestations happening right now with the Supreme Court decisions in America.
right. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing those. It's funny, actually, as I was preparing for this interview and thinking about some of the questions that I wanted to ask you, bell hooks really came forward for me as well. Um, let's start first with you have on page 11 of your book, your definition of patriarchy. And I want to read that out first, just to make it clear for people when we're using this term patriarchy, what is it that we mean? But also, it brought to mind bell hooks and the ways that she named this white supremacist, capitalist, patriarchal, heteronormative society. So your definition of patriarchy is the emotional, physical, mental, metaphysical, political, social, and economic manifestation of the false belief and oppressive ideology that individuals and groups aligned with what is subjectively deemed to be femininity and or womanhood are inferior or are of lesser value than the subjective opposite, i.e., masculinity and or manhood. Now, you go deeper into this explanation in the book, but I just wanted that to kick us off of this, the subjectivity of womanhood and femininity and the subjectivity of masculinity and of manhood. And it made me, as I was reading your book, I was thinking about my own kind of burgeoning understanding of patriarchy, because my earliest childhood experiences of difference and discrimination were not for me as myself as a girl, right? They were
Mhm.
for me and myself as a Black person. And it
Mm.
really wasn't until I was an adult that I began to really critically think about and understand what it meant to be a woman in a world that views women as quote unquote inferior or of lesser value, right? And I didn't have a book like yours. This was, I want to say 2015 maybe. So not even that long ago, but 2015. And the books that were available were primarily from white women. They were the ones that I could see naming this thing called patriarchy, but they were naming it in a very specific way.
Right.
And it really was white male patriarchy. And it really didn't, it really was about women as a whole, but really white women, being only at the hands, at the harm end of patriarchy and not being participants in it as well. And in my reading and deepening, and as I began to come across writers such as bell hooks and began to get a more complex understanding, I began to understand myself better as well as a Black woman who was experiencing the intersections of racism and sexism. And so those books by Black women writers were really important to me.
Mhm.
But when I came across your book, I got an even further layer, because I don't know maybe they're out there, but I don't know of another book by a Black male author that explores patriarchy and all of its many nuances. So this is what I'm trying to ask you is, what is Patriarchy Blues about and why did you write it? Because this book doesn't exist anywhere.
It's interesting. I think you answered the question for me, right? I think the working backwards, my personality, as not just as a writer, but just as a person, is to fill the gaps that exist, right? Like that's just for better or for worse. My partner tells me all the time, you might not be able to fix that, and even sometimes when we talk, she's like, I don't necessarily want you to fix it as much as I want you to hear me. And that's something that I'm working on and navigating myself because I'm always trying to fix something, right? But I think when I was on the same journey as you, right, like unpacking not just patriarchy, but white supremacy. There were just books that didn't exist. And I think with both my books, my first book and this one, I was like, this doesn't exist, right? Like I think, and I don't, because I don't like to saturate a market or a space if something's there, right? Like I think, for example, the YA version of your book, right? Like we didn't have that when I was we didn't have that when I was growing up, right? So I couldn't really speak to like, oh, this is what, I couldn't speak to any of that. So even when I wrote my first YA book, it was like, oh, we don't have this, right? So Patriarchy Blues was my way of creating something that didn't exist, but also being the messenger that some people might be willing to listen to because of the existence of the things I'm talking about in the book, right? Like, what does it look like to not have a white woman writing about, white mainstream feminism, because a lot of times everything else is lost in that conversation, right? And then inherently still upholding white patriarchal systems. And then what does it also look like to have the person not necessarily even be a Black woman, because Black men are not always inclined, sadly, to listen to Black women. So what does it look like for me to write this book as a Black cis man and then say, hey, and these are some of the people I learned from. Please go learn from these Black women now, right? So the book is a journey towards something greater. And in terms of what the book's about, I think the book is about the fact that we are all implicated in our own ways in upholding patriarchy, right? Like as opposed to saying, and that's that long, convoluted definition that I give because it needs to be, right?
Absolutely.
This is not and just to be really transparent, I think this is not white mainstream feminism. Because I think one of the issues you see even now with conversations about bodily autonomy, they don't extend in the white feminist lens to trans people, as an example, right? Like people say like, oh, don't use birthing people, so on and so forth, because you want to be exclusive, because you're not interested necessarily in equity, you're interested in power. Right? And what does it look like for us to not be interested in power, but be interested in equity? Because if you're interested in equity, then you have to look at everyone who's harmed, right? Not just the people who are harmed, who you ultimately want having power.
Yeah. Yeah. And you speak to something that I really enjoyed about this book. And it was kind of, to be honest, I'm not sure what I expected when I opened the book. Do you know what I mean? Like, because the book doesn't exist. So I wasn't sure what I was expecting the main thrust of the conversation to be. And what I think was really unexpected for me was that although you do share your own experiences, many of which were very heavy, you also really offer different perspectives of people who are often left out of the conversations when we're talking about patriarchy and the ways that it impacts them. Or the ways that they may be complicit in it. And so when you move from essay to story to letter, as your book is very lyrical, you never know what's coming next. Is it going to be a poem? Is it going to be a letter? And whose story is going to be told next? Or where is Frederick shining the spotlight for us, right? So we can have like a piece that's on your relationship with your mother and how she taught you how to fight, right? And how that impacted you as you became a man. But then you also have a piece on decriminalizing sex work, right? And so there's this breadth of touch points for us to really consider and understand the ways in which patriarchy is not just white men or even just men doing things to women, and cis het men doing things to cis het women, but really it's so broad. And so I'm interested to know about kind of your journey of gathering, because this is an understanding, these are lessons that you must have learned along the way. And I'm wondering, if you can tell us a little bit about that, how these different pieces came to you, especially those that are not your direct experiences.
Yeah, I mean, being in community, right? I think that far too often, this is one of the reasons why I have issues with certain books that are talking about racism. I don't think that you always have to experience everything to defend a community or to shine a light on a community, but you shouldn't be talking over that community. And also, you have to actually be in proximity and within that community often, right? So, like when I'm talking about like my theory of change in this book, right? If I do have a center of my theory of change, it is Black trans women, right? If
Right.
there's, and I think I start the book out with them, but not because I've read about them or been on Twitter or Instagram. Like I've actually like I love them. They are like I have Black trans women in my life who are some of the closest people to me. People who I have cried with, I have laughed with, I've been to the beach with, right? Like these are people who will be in my future children's lives, right? Like it's not the same as how other people do it. So what I tried to accomplish in this book was almost like a case for support, right? A case for being heard. I can't speak for the Black trans women in this nation or globally, but I can ask others to listen, right? And
Yes.
make a case for that listening. So that's what I tried to do. And I think that a lot of lessons that I learned in writing Patriarchy Blues and how I wanted to try to accomplish that, quite frankly, was just not being and doing what I had seen a lot of white authors do around race, right?
Speak on it.
Um, yeah, I did
Tell
not want
us.
to. I did not want to do that, right? When I think about the space of even, let's say, anti-racism work, right? I think about, let's say, your book or your books and Ibram, and I think about Jason, and I think about myself, and just the myriad of people doing the work, right? I wonder to myself, like, how many of those people have, let's say like a Robin DiAngelo, been at like a conference and said, "Hey, I don't need to show up this conference. You need to you need to send one of them," right? Or like in the back of my first book, I have a whole list of books that people should read on race because it's not just about me, right? And because I've seen how painful it is. Like literally, I am scratching and clawing for people to buy Patriarchy Blues and support it in any capacity, right? Like it's not really getting the support that we would like it to get, and that's okay. But it would take one, white woman who's talking over people to change the entire course of this book, right? So
Right.
if I'm feeling like that, and I do have privilege, then what are people feeling like in a hierarchical society who have even less privilege than me? So I've
Right.
tried to do this thing where I'm like, hey, I'm not going to talk over you. I'm not going to take up your space. I'm going to simply try to use my power, if you would, in writing and platform to create more space.
Yeah. That's thank you for sharing that. And I really felt that. Like I think I was trying to find like, okay, as a man, like writing about patriarchy, I think I had a super lens because I was looking for how is he. I want to give you context for this. Oftentimes, so this wasn't a suspicion of you, Frederick, as a person, but oftentimes I'll say myself, when I have been in spaces where there have been men who are self-identified feminists, oftentimes I've seen that they have been able to cause the most harm
Mm-hmm.
because they know how to use the right language, they know how to say the right things, they know how to project a certain image, but they, in the same way that white people who feel that they're in the work with racism will kind of say, well, I get a pass because I'm not like those other white people. That can happen with men as well as it relates to patriarchy. So I think I had a super lens going in because I wanted to know, where is he going to take this? How is he going to take this? What I really loved and respected about your book was that, first of all, you really went there with telling your own personal stories, and you really kind of indicted yourself, it wasn't, this is the problem out in the world with toxic masculinity. No, it was, this is my journey with this. These are the lessons I've had to learn. These are the ways that it shaped me. And it wasn't even like, and now I'm better, right? Like it was, and now I'm still on the journey, right? But I really respected the ways that you were highlighting, like you said, people who have even lesser privileges than you, without it feeling like you were trying to speak for them, or that you were unwittingly being condescending. It felt super respectful. There was a lot of care and intentionality that went into the ways that you crafted those pieces. And it sounds like, and I don't know, I guess I'm trying to confirm this, but it sounds like you had people who were able to hold you accountable. We're like, these are our stories. These are our things. We want to make sure, right?
Oh, absolutely. I think the first thing is, when you're trying to create space for a community, you shouldn't be doing it because you're trying to gain power and capital, right? You should do it because you love the community. And when you love a community, you do everything that you can to protect the community in a way that even means protecting the community from yourself, right? So I feel like, again, and I hate to just kind of come back to this, I really did learn lessons from like white feminist authors of like what I didn't want to do.
Right.
And in that, I don't even call myself a feminist, right? Like, I guess if I was someone,
yes,
I'd be
you didn't actually in the book at all.
I don't call myself a feminist. In the upcoming book, Better We Found It, which is another YA book, I write the chapter on feminism in that book. So the book is about gun violence and feminism and military industrial complex and transphobia, homophobia, all these different things. But I write the chapter on feminism not because I know more than my partner who co-wrote the book with me, but because we say this. It's like, I'm making a case for why men need to be in progress in this work. And that's what I am. I'm in progress, right? Like, I will be in progress till the day I die. I mean, transparently, me and my fiance, we just got into an argument 15 minutes ago before I jumped on this thing, and part of it was us, she's biracial and we're unpacking her real feelings around patriarchy in society and like learned in our relationship. And I'm unpacking white supremacy and how like her as a fair-skinned biracial woman, how that manifests in our relationship. So we do the work on a regular basis. So like, she wouldn't call herself an expert in race. I wouldn't call myself an expert in feminism. We are literally just trying to do the work. And if I can get other people to do the work and be on the journey, then that is great for me. I am not those guys, like not even just those guys, those people like who like self-proclaim themselves things. You're not really it then. Like, I will die in progress of trying to be an intersectional feminist.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. What do you think conversations that men have with each other about patriarchy? What needs to happen in those conversations?
I think two things. I think accountability and love, because I think that when you lead with love within spaces of people with people you actually do love, it makes way for the accountability to be taken in a way where change can happen, right? So like, again, I mentioned this earlier, having my group chat with Dante and Joel and Robert and a few other people are in there. They're all it's all Black men, and there are times when we just fight. Like, we're literally sending each other voicemails like, I saw what you said on this, didn't like it because of this, and they're like, well, bro, you didn't think of it this way. But that is literally the work that we need to be doing with each other, because we're talking about everything, right? We're talking about how we relate to Black women. We're talking about how we relate to white feminism, how we relate to the publishing space, how we relate to each other as platform people, and all these different things, right?
Yeah.
If I said something on here that, let's say, Robert thought wasn't great, Robert will tell me with love, you need to do better. But those are the conversations that we need to have. And I think that globally, two things are not true right now, maybe more than ever. That you can care about somebody and also hold somebody accountable.
Mm,
right?
yes.
We're not making enough space for that existence where it's like, bring me in out of love, right? Like bring me in out of love. I don't do like every space. Like that's why I was deeply appreciative of you all creating a space and allowing me to be in here. But I trust you, right? And I said that earlier on when we were behind the scenes. I said, hey, ask me whatever you like because I trust you because I feel the love in the space, and also I know what you're about,
Mm.
right? We need more of that.
Yeah. Yeah. As you're sharing that about kind of like the group chat and the dynamics there, and I think about my own kind of conversations with my inner circle, my trust crew, and what it is that makes it so that when they do say, this isn't okay, or you may want to look at this, that I'm able to stay in the room, right?
Mhm.
They're not coming for me. They're not, they're saying this out of love. And that takes time to build those relationships and build that trust and build
Mhm.
the feeling that it's safe to be vulnerable here.
Yeah.
And you talk about in your book so many, and I've alluded to it a number of times, but I don't want to give everything away. So I want people to come into the book club and read it with us. But there are so many personal stories that you share of times when like you had interests in things that just took your heart. And then other people would say, well, that's soft, or that's not what boys do, or that's not okay, and you just, you were like, okay, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm not going to do it like that, or I'm going to try and mask it in some way. And I was reading the book. I kept thinking of my children because I have a boy and a girl,
Yeah.
and they are, unique individuals as every human being is. And as they're growing up, I'm so trying to be so careful with the language about how we say what is for whom and what isn't, right? And so there's things I'll catch them up really quickly, but I also have a lot of fear for them as a mother because they're growing up in a different society than I did, with social media, with all of that. And you talk about social media in your book. What advice do you have, I guess, for parents and people who are caregivers who want to raise children who are aware of what the patriarchy is and who are not complicit in it and allowing kids to be free, the kind of freedom that you wish you'd had growing up, that I wish I'd had growing up?
Yeah, I think, well, first and foremost, my favorite space that exists in this world is spaces that exist in this world, spaces in which I get to talk about young people. That's my favorite writing. I think that it's the most important writing also, in my personal opinion. But for parents, I would say believe that you know nothing, right? Like, believe you literally know nothing because all of us as people, right? We have all of this unpacking to do, all this navigating to do. Even like when we look at like the anti-racist movement that like really, really blew up in the summer of 2020, I said one of the failures of the movement is that not enough people of color and Black people specifically are able to do the work. We're not being put in spaces to also do certain readings and things like that because we have to realize we have been indoctrinated, internalized, so on and so forth, right? And this happens to everybody. It happens to women with patriarchy, Black and brown people with white supremacy, and it happens to parents with the generational traumas and failures that we're bringing into spaces with these kids, right? Like, so like think that you know nothing and be prepared to relearn, right? And sometimes learn from your children,
Mm.
like literally learn from your children. I talk to young people all the time, like weekly, who are educating their parents on these things. So I'm a major proponent of meetings of the minds with young people, right? Like actually treating young people like people. Like meet them meet them and create space for you both to grow as you are trying to teach them what lessons can you learn from being their parent.
Wow. I love that so much because yes, my kids teach me a lot. And a lot of times I'm like, how do you even know this? Where is this coming from? You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I love that so much.
I forgot to add this on, and I think that that's especially true with the current moment we're in because they are seeing so much, right?
Mm,
They are seeing so much with social media, with global communication. They are literally seeing more than we ever did. Right? They
ever.
are seeing more than we ever did. So you have to go into expectation. You have to expect that you're going into conversations that you might not know everything about, right? Like you might literally
Mm,
be adding to something as opposed to building something anew, right? Like you might be more transphobic, let's say, than your daughter who's in a class with 5 trans classmates, right?
right. Right.
So you might be teaching empathy, but you're not necessarily teaching like what it looks like to be a trans ally. They might be teaching you how to be a trans ally while you're also teaching empathy, right? Like, and all these different things are happening at the same time. I just wanted to add that in there just to give context.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. I do think that as each generation, um, each generation has its work to do and each generation passes the baton on to the next one. And as we go through each one, you're right. Like the one that comes before will have still some hangups from the generation that came before them, right? But those that come afterwards are, in a lot of ways, their perspective is very, very different. And so we have to learn from them.
Dear good ancestors, let's take a short break for a minute. Are you enjoying this episode? Then you should join our book club. The Become a Good Ancestor book club is a place for book-loving changemakers. We are a community of engaged people from around the world who are passionate about social justice, creativity, leadership, healing, liberation, and of course, books. Each month on Patreon, we read and discuss the book from the current month's episode. And at the end of the month, we host an exclusive Q&A event with the author themselves. Our past books and authors include the New York Times bestseller The Prophets by Robert Jones Jr., Motherhood on the Choices of Being a Woman by Dr. Pragya Agrawal, The Final Revival of Opal and Nev by Donnie Walton, named a Best Book of 2021 by Barack Obama, and See No Stranger, a memoir and manifesto of revolutionary love by renowned civil rights leader Valerie Carr. The internet can often be a loud and overwhelming place. There's a lot of information out there, but not always a lot of depth. When you join our book club, you'll become a member of a thoughtful and hopeful corner of the internet. To learn more, click the link in the show notes or visit becomeagoodancestor.com/book club. We can't wait to see you there.
Before I ask a final question, I'm going to bring on Rima Zaman, who's our book club facilitator. But I wanted to shift the conversation a little bit because Patriarchy Blues is an incredible, incredible book. It's one that it is heavy. I will say that, and I mean that in the sense of it's one that it softened me. It softened me because as I read each piece, I heard a story or a perspective or read a letter that just broke me open. And it showed me more humanity. And the thing about humanity, and we talk a lot about, reclaiming our humanity and living in the dignity of our humanity. But the thing about humanity is that it's messy and there is a lot of depth and heaviness and trauma and pain and grief. And what I really appreciate about your book is that it tells the truth, but it also is leading us to a better way forward. It was showing us this is the impact of what can happen if you treat a child like this, or if you expect these things from certain people, or if you deny people certain things. This is what can happen. And so what is a better way? But when I finished reading it, I was preparing for this interview. So I went and typed your name into YouTube because I'm a visual person. And because I'd found your work through social media, through, your post, I hadn't made the link that you were the person who started the Black Panther Challenge.
Yeah.
And so when I saw that, I was so happy. Like, I can't even tell you that movie gave me so much joy. Like, I saw it 6 times in the cinema, sometimes by myself, sometimes with my daughter, my husband, but a lot of the times by myself. It's a movie I can watch again and again and again. You started the Black Panther Challenge, and then you also started the challenge of my other favorite Marvel movie, which is the Captain Marvel Challenge as well. Again, I can watch that movie a million times over. So you made it so that young Black and brown kids and kids from underrepresented, under-resourced areas could go into the movies and watch these incredible stories. And I just want to say thank you. Like, the little girl inside of me is so joyful that you did that. But also like the juxtaposition of like the heaviness and the truth and the like, heart like wrenchingness of Patriarchy Blues, but also the joy and the like, like the ecstasy of that work. And I realized that's Fred. Like, he's all of that together. Yeah, so I just wanted to name that because I finished the book and I was like, this is a lot. And I Google you and I'm like, this guy wrote this.
I appreciate it. It's almost an emotional thing because as part of why in the book I wrote the letter to Chadwick. So Chadwick and I, through the Black Panther Challenge, actually had become cool, and his wife Simone, she's just a kind person. I actually had sent her the book and that specific essay to him beforehand and asked for approval. And I think that Black people, oftentimes, we don't really get the space to be dynamic in the imaginations of other people, right?
Yeah.
So, I do love when people find that out, right? They're just like, wait, like well, besides doing that, you're a geek, right? They're just, because I think because of the nature of what I talk about, what you talk about, what all these people talk about, like, I would never necessarily know that by being on your page or listen, like, oh yeah, like you saw Black Panther 6 times, right? But we are that. We are so dynamic as human beings, and but I am excited to say, so I don't, this is not public yet, but whatever. So
it is now.
It is now. So for Black Panther 2, Marvel Studios actually had me write the picture book for it. Because
that's amazing. Oh my gosh.
They had me write the picture book, and
wow.
They didn't realize when I was doing all that. They're like, oh, he writes, and then later on I became a New York Times bestseller. They're like, wait, what? So I wrote the picture book, and I specifically got to do something that I can't say what it is, but I got to do. The book exists in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So like whatever story I have told and whatever it's about exists in Black Panther and Iron Man and so on and so forth. And I'm looking for. I'll make sure to get you a copy. Please
do, because I love it so much.
Yeah. I'll make sure
love it so much. Oh my goodness! I'm like Googling you and seeing you on the couch with like Chadwick Boseman, who I don't like fangirl over celebrities very much, or like have this. Yeah. I think Beyonce is the only person that I'm like, yes, okay. But Chadwick Boseman was that for me. And when he passed, that was really hard for me. And for so many of us, for so many different reasons. And so to see your tribute to him and to know that this legacy is continuing as well is just so beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Yeah, well, thank you for bringing it up and for, bringing Chadwick into space. I think, I gotta probably change the subject. I can be,
yes, Wakanda forever. Yes,
forever, Wakanda forever.
All right, I'm gonna bring in our book club facilitator, Rima Zaman. Now, she's gonna ask you some questions. So Rima leads our book club discussions in the Good Ancestor Book Club. She is an author herself, and she's a very thoughtful, intentional, and generous person. And I love the discussions that she hosts in the book club. So welcome, Rima.
Hi, thank you so much, Layla, and thank you, Fred. It's been an honor and privilege to listen to you both speak about this, and I'm glad you segued into Black Panther and Joy, because I had started crying listening to a lot of what you were sharing, and your book moved me so deeply. And if there were if so many men in the world hadn't been taught to reject love, or believe that love and vulnerability means the abandonment of self or independence, and making them push away their families, their loved ones, their lovers, the world would be a much kinder place. However, and both, your book gave me so much more empathy for the the harm caused in those men who then are taught that harms. And because of you let us see, and you let us learn that it's because love was rejected from them, or someone taught them that love is the abandonment of self, and that's why they then push away love in return. And so we're all hurting, which also means if we're hurting from the same things, it also means we can heal together, which I think is one of the most powerful lessons from your book. If we are ailed by the same system, then surely we can heal together through connecting and finding empathy in our connected pain. So that's why I was crying, and I'm so glad you guys took it into Black Panthers. I had some time to be like,
the two of you want me to cry on here today too. I'm just like,
yeah. Well, we can save that for our fireside chat. That's usually when the authors start crying. So I'm conscious of our time as well. So I have two questions for you, and I wanted to ask first. Your essays are so profound and so powerful. Each one is showstopper. I wanted to ask you, which one are you most proud of?
Ooh, wow. I think that, I don't know that there's one that I'm particularly most proud of, which is a cop out. I'm fully aware. It's not an essay, but the letter to my father, in the latter half of the book, is what I'm most proud of. Not necessarily just as an author, but as a human being, because I not only let go of him conceptually, right? I've never really been around my father, and we have never had a relationship. But I not only let go of him conceptually, and even metaphysically, I let go of him in my pain. Like I have this thing I say all the time, and I'm like, we all walk around with luggage. And the luggage is filled with things, and you can't have joy in your luggage if there's too much pain in your luggage. There's just not room for both, right? So you have to let go of some of that pain in order to make room for more joy, and then travel with that. So I let go of a lot of the harm and pain he caused me, and also forgave him. I forgave him because I would be remiss to write this book and to see these systems and to understand what it was like being a Afro Latino man in the 80s during the crack epidemic in America, and to be caught up and swept away in that, and not also in part forgive him for what the systems did. I don't forgive him necessarily for my pain, but I forgive him for what he could not control in having become a person who caused it. So that I'm proud of.
It's beautiful. Thank you. What you said about we all carry around so much luggage. And one of the things I've been thinking about a lot is, like the adage, take care of your trauma before it becomes someone else's trauma.
Mm.
But if we change one word slightly and we say, take care of your hurt before you share that hurt, or before it becomes someone else's hurt, immediately, like the first line can almost be shaming. But when we change trauma to hurt, we realize we both have been hurt.
Oh, yes. Oh,
Right?
yes.
And it's so much
Oh,
more
yes.
empathetic that way. And that's exactly what
Absolutely.
you've just spoken on. My next question for you is, you write, one of my favorite essays was The Rot in the Garden. And and one of my favorite things about your style of writing is you lead us with a very subtle hand through a story or a letter. And it's very deceptively simple language, which then like
Mm.
guts us. And we're like, oh my
Mm.
God, we don't realize we're going to feel something until pow, we're hit by that wave of emotion that you have conjured in us or alchemized in us. And
Mm.
you do that so well in every single piece of yours. And I think in particular, The Rot in the Garden, where we think it's going to be an essay about social media, and it is. Nonetheless, you use that as a container to speak so profoundly on your life with MS. And you take us on a profound and staggering journey. And it's the most powerful depiction of Instagram versus reality that I've ever come across. So thank you for writing it. And I also wanted to ask you, what is the relationship between your MS and your writing? Or I should say your art.
Yeah. Well, I think, first and foremost, I just appreciate the kind words that you've given me about that piece and so many pieces. I actually wrote that purposefully like that. I think that
Mm,
I started it out deceptively to kind of like mirror the deception that is social media, right?
right.
Like this idea that you don't really know what's behind or what's looming and things like that. So I wanted to write it almost like as this analogy to the very concept of what I was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of my art and my writing specifically and things like that pertain to in relation to my MS, it's I think that it gives me a chance, not to be not to be cliche here or to be make a pun, but it gives me a chance to be a good ancestor, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was and it's and I started the book with that actually, right? Very much the idea of what does it look like to start considering our legacies, right? Not considering your legacies necessarily at the end, not considering your legacies in bad times or when things are difficult or you feel like you're not going to get a chance, but what does it look like to consider our legacies as we're alive, as we're thriving, as we're existing, right? So my MS and my writing is very much that, right? Like
Mm,
I'm not writing about certain things and not tackling certain issues because I feel like I'm going to die. I'm tackling them because I feel like I'm alive, right? And it gives me that opportunity, to say I was here. And when I was here, I made it worth it.
mm. Oh, I love that. It's beautiful. Woo, so empowering and inspiring. Thank you so much, Fred.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Rima. Thank you, Fred, so much for this conversation. I loved listening into there. And when you said to be, to think about being a good ancestor just gave me chills, just so many
Mm-hmm.
chills. Because you are that good ancestor to us and to so many people. And we're just so thankful for the legacy that you're already living while you're alive. And I always say, I talk all the time about becoming a good ancestor. I'm not ready to be that ancestor yet. I want to live a very long and
Yeah.
full life, and I want to use it all up. And I see you doing that, and we're so grateful. to wrap up this conversation, I want to ask you, what does becoming a good ancestor mean to you?
To me, becoming a good ancestor, I think twofold. Being someone who lives in the image of the best parts of my mother and my grandmother. And someone who created, I wouldn't just say spaces, someone who created, I think sometimes spaces are too small. I think a world, right? A world. I think of someone who created a world in collaboration with people like Rima and yourself that can stand against everything else, right? That's what it looks like to me, right? Like, because a space is something that can be moved. A space is something that can no longer exist. You can't move a world, right? And if we keep doing things like this, in my opinion, we are creating that world, right? Where, nothing can move us. This is what it looks like to me.
Wow, that is powerful. When you went from space to world, that just took it to a whole new level. And I hope everybody listening in can feel the shift of think bigger. Think way, way bigger, and allowing our creativity and our infinite vision to just shine through, because there is world-changing work that needs to be done, and we could build whole new worlds where the things that we're experiencing today, that we've experienced for centuries, could not exist, and we could have totally different relationships with each other and with our planet. So thank you very much, Frederick. This was such a joy of a conversation. You're incredible. Cannot wait for your next book. That will be the first to pre-order, and just so grateful for your kinship as well.
I am deeply grateful for the two of you and for having me. And I hope that people enjoy the book. I hope that we all learn from it. I'm still learning from having written it. So thank you so, so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. We hope you've enjoyed learning about today's author and their incredible work. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and leave us some love with a rating and review. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. And of course, don't forget to buy the book we talked about today. We're on a mission to center and celebrate BIPOC authors, and you can help us do that by sharing this episode and the book. You can join us in our book club to dive deeper into today's book. Visit becomegoodancestor.com/book club to find out more. For more inspiration and learning, you can find us at becomegoodancestor.com and become_a_good_ancestor on Instagram. Thank you for being on the journey with us as we strive to become good ancestors, in honor of those who have come before us and in service to those who will come after we are gone.